Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome today to this BPCA webinar. My name is Natalie Bungay. I'm the Technical and Compliance Manager here at BPCA. And yeah, I have a pleasure today talking to you about understanding pests in food businesses. Just before we get started, just wanted to do a bit of an introduction for any of you that are new and also for those that are not, and just want to remind what today's about. So in terms of what we're doing, all these webinars, they're aimed at all levels of experience, and you might be new to the industry. It's certainly going to help you. I think a lot of the information in today's webinar will possibly be brand new. We'll talk a bit about legislation, things like that as well, and how to implement it and what you do as a pest controller in your role in food businesses. So yeah, a lot to learn there. And also those of you that are more experienced and been in the industry for a little while, you know, some good reminders, maybe some bits that you'll pick up and think, oh yeah, actually I forgot about that. You know, that's something to remember going forward, and it really, really does contribute in a great way to your CPD. So welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. Again, just before we get started, my colleague Kat is behind the scenes there, just keeping an eye on things. So if we have any technical issues, be it audio or visual, Kat will possibly pop up and say, right, Natalie's just turning her computer off and on, or whatever it needs to be. But hopefully, I think we're looking okay today and everything's pretty stable. If there are any technical problems that you're experiencing that maybe we're not picking up on, so audio or visual, then we have a chat section. Kat's already popped a quick message in there just to say, you know, if you do have any issues, let us know, and she'll try and advise you on things that you can do to try and make it better. And also maybe it is our end and we can sort that out. Really important you get a good experience, you can hear everything that we're talking about today. We have a Q&A section. So again, for those that are new to this, and just a reminder to those that are not, if you have a question for me that you want me to read out and attempt to answer, then please pop that in the Q&A section, the question and answers, because I won't necessarily see what's going on in the chat section. Again, if anyone has missed that message, if you do put a question in the chat section, Kat will just prompt you to put it in the Q&As, okay? And anything that I don't get to, as always, I'll pop out an email afterwards just with a, sorry we didn't get to this live, but here's the answer. Again, anything that I cover today, I've envisioned is something that you guys will be interested in, that will be useful to you day to day when you're out there. But if there is anything I haven't covered and you think, oh, you know, actually I'd quite like to ask Natalie about a subject that's not in the webinar about food businesses, you know, maybe it's a topic I haven't quite covered because we've only got an hour, then again, ask the question. It's not a problem. I'll try and get to it. But again, if I can't, I will get to it at some point and send it out an email. Okay, one CPD point today. So you will have pre-registered. So you would have hopefully put in your CPD number with your basis prompt or BPCA registered, and we'll get that uploaded for you. So 1 point today be uploaded for you. If you are watching this later on and you're not watching it live, then of course you wouldn't have registered, and it'll be something you're doing off of your own back. And you'll need to go and register that one CPD point with the relevant CPD scheme. If it's us, just give us a call and we'll guide you through it. And if it's basis prompt, give them a call and they can advise you on how to do that. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it really. I can't see you and hear you. So if you're sat there having a snack or a coffee, don't worry, I can't see you. You carry on. I'm quite jealous, to be honest. And yeah, as I said, anything you want to tell us or talk to us about, get it in that Q&A section on the chat section. Okay, fabulous. I'm going to share my screen. If anything's going to go wrong, it's going to be now. Great. And you should be able to see. Let me just check that share. Sorry there, guys. Wrong one. There we go. Cat will pop up if it's not quite right for me. I'm assuming that is the right to view. Okay, so understanding pests in food businesses then. You know, this webinar, you know, it's not about individual pests. So I'm going to touch on some pests. Of course I am. You know, it's about understanding pests in food businesses. But it's more about the problems that they cause generically and why food businesses don't want them within their businesses, and why you want to try and prevent them. So, yeah, it's not sort of a biology or behavior webinar. We've got some of those that you can go and view after today, different ones on different insects and rodents. So feel free to do that to understand those individual pests a bit more. But, I may touch on some characteristics or behaviors that some of these pests exhibit, but only where maybe it's specifically related to food businesses and where it causes a problem. Okay, so with regards to the agenda, I'm going to cover, the importance of pest management in food businesses. Of course, we probably all know the importance, but it's a good reminder and some food for thought. A bit of an example of pests in food businesses. As I said, it won't be a biology lesson. It's going to be these are the typical things that we're going to come across and the issues surrounding that. And then, of course, your role as a pest professional and the things that you can do to be able to support your customer who has a food business. Really important, isn't it? Because you keep your customer happy and you do what they want you to do, they're going to stick with you, aren't they? And they're going to appreciate everything you do and pay your bills. Important stuff. Great. Okay. And of course, we do questions at the end. I'm going to do them at the end. I won't be sort of stopping intermittently throughout the webinar because it can mess up the flow a little bit. And yes, I'm all about keeping in the flow of things and making sure I don't lose myself or lose any of you guys. So I'll do the questions at the end. So again, you've got lots of time to get them in throughout. And again, I'll look at those. Fabulous. Right. So we all like talking about legislation, don't we? I don't say that with sarcasm because really we should. We legislation is very important in pest management. Really, really important. A lot of the things that we do have legislation associated with it or reasons why that area that you're dealing with has a piece of legislation that says that pest shouldn't be there. And in terms of food businesses, we've got the Food Safety Act 1990. So in terms of legislation, it's important to you understand how legislation works. So this is not a legislation, obviously, webinar, but it's still important you know how it works. And the main thing to remember is that we have acts. So we have acts of parliament. They're the big things. So here, the Food Safety Act 1990, that's a large bit of legislation. It's the enforcement capabilities. If an EHO was to go to a food business and they were to issue any improvement notices or any prosecutions for any reason, they would use an act to do that. It's normally the most powerful bit of legislation and the easiest bit of legislation to be able to issue those prosecutions and fines. So the Food Safety Act is the main bit of legislation that EHOs will be looking at. So, although it's not directly associated with covering pest management, it might not be mentioned specifically. The Food Safety Act is what enforcement officers use to issue these improvement notices, prohibition orders, and emergency prohibition orders. More detailed regulations is where the detail comes in. So you have the act at the top, and then you have a regulation that will come underneath that. And you might have multiple regulations. For instance, the Health and Safety at Work Act, you've got the COSH regulations, the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, the PPE regulations. There's all sorts of things to cover areas more specifically. So with the Food Safety Act, the main one that's going to be of interest is the Food Hygiene Regulations 2006. So, in terms of your customer in the food business, you having this sort of, I say basic knowledge, it's not basic, it's quite detailed. So but having this knowledge of the legislation that's important to your customers is going to install a lot of confidence in them, isn't it? It's going to give them that, visual and the confidence that, my pest controller knows what they're talking about. They know the things that I need to comply with. So I'm confident they're going to help me do that. And of course, there's lots of things in the food hygiene regulations. It's not just pest control, but we're talking about pest control today, aren't we? So the main bits within it, so this is England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. They usually have the different bits of legislation or regulation will have those different countries in brackets within it, but they all pretty much say the same thing. And that's that, food businesses must develop their own procedures based on the principles of HACCP. I'm going to show you HACCP in a minute. Go to another slide for that. It's a plan, they've got to implement a procedure to protect their business. And again, it's not just all about pest control, it's about the business as a whole, as a food business. And, their fridge temperatures have got to be correct, and they've got to have the right cleaning and hygiene in place, and hand washing facilities, things like that. But also in there will be pest management. There's going to be expectations with pest management. So again, we always form a part, a small part of a bigger principles or a bigger piece of procedures that needs to be put in. We're always an integral part of that. Also within this food hygiene regulations, they state things like, and this is not an exclusive list or a comprehensive list, these are just some of the key important elements. You can go and study a little bit more if you wanted to, but it does talk about the layout, design and construction of a premises. So of course, we talk about proofing all the time, don't we? Seal that hole, that gap under your door's too big, or, those tiles are loose from, the side of the wall and could, let insects harbour in there. So, your customer has responsibility under the food hygiene regulations to make sure their building is of good layout, design and construction to prevent pests. Okay. Also, windows and doors that open externally. So again, another important element. These are all things that can help you to, give an executive summary to your customer, to say to your customer, look, I need you to do these things. This is why I need you to do these things. Because that helps, doesn't it? If you say to one of your customers, I need you to fix that and seal that, it'll probably cost you a few £100. I'm off now, see you later. Now, they still might listen to you. They might have known you for a while and think, yeah, I've got trust in you that, what you're telling me is right. But what about just adding to them? Look, the food hygiene regulations, I know it's something that you're going to be assessed by if an EHO comes along. And in those regulations, it says you need to do these things. So, you give them weight to your recommendations. It really does help you out. Even write it in your reports. That will look great. That will, really, really help you. So, windows and doors that open externally, as it says on the label, if they've got windows that open to the outside elements, of course, pests or small birds and things like that could possibly fly in, flies. So if they want those windows open for airflow, they need to put a screen on it so that those pests can't fly in. Now, if those windows that open externally are actually nailed shut or screwed shut, which happens sometimes, they might think, what, we've got good ventilation, we don't want them windows open, full stop. I'd rather just put a screw in it and fix that window so it doesn't open to the outside world. And great, that's fine. You don't need a fly screen. But it's those windows and doors that open up to the outside elements. Again, the same with doors. If they've got a door there that they prop open in hot weather, we've all seen it, haven't we? Or they prop open when a delivery comes in. They need some form of protection from, flying insects, isn't it? The main thing. Depends on how big those doors are. You do have food businesses that are large factory floors and they might have big shutter doors where birds can fly in. Again, a little bit more complicated. You're not going to put a fly screen on a particularly large shutter door, but there are other things that you can think about, like air curtains and so on and so forth. But yeah, so windows and doors that open externally, they need to be either shut permanently or fly screens or other things attached to them to make sure pests don't get in. And then the waste stores design. So, we all know a lot of the time, whether it's flies or rodents, even birds and squirrels and so on and so forth, if you've got a waste area that, is typically and should be away from the main building, that's the ideal bit. They collect their waste as they go along within the food premises. And then when it's full and bagged up, they then take it outside and put it in a separate waste area. Now, again, these need to be of good design. It needs to be a good distance away from the building so that if you do get flies and things like that, there's less chance that they're going to then want to come into the building. If you put your bins right up against a external wall that's close to a door that leads into a kitchen, you're just asking for trouble, really, aren't you? Because as much work as you do to keep a bin clean, you're going to have residues on there, unfortunately. different times, possibly when you've had a busy day or your customers had a busy day. So there will be odd flies that are attracted by the smell. Flies can, detect these things from miles away. So they'll be investigating and trying to get into that bin. And hopefully they won't be able to, because it'll be of a good design that it doesn't allow access to different types of pests and flies in this occasion. So if they can't get there, they might think, oh, there's an open door there, I'll scoot in there. So if we've got a really good waste store area that's far away from the build, I say not too far away, you don't want to be, traveling 4 miles up the road with a bin or anything like that, close to the building, but, far enough away that it's not going to have a detrimental impact on, encouraging pests to go into that building. So we want it a bit further away from the building. The bins are nice and sealed. They're cleaned regularly. These are all things that, contribute to a good design as well as good hygiene measures. And then we're less likely to get flies and rats. And if we do, it's far enough away from the building to protect them. Okay, if that makes perfect sense. Okay, so there is more to this legislation, this regulation, but really important, good stuff to take away with you. Remember, and when you're speaking to your customers, you can, impress them with your knowledge on what they need to comply with legally as a food business. So I mentioned HACCP earlier. So HACCP's a way of managing food safety hazards. Food management procedures should be based on HACCP principles. So all of your food hygiene training, level 2s and level 3s, things like that, is a requirement for these food businesses to have people qualified, for example, in food hygiene practices. That's just one tiny part of what HACCP wants. So pest management is, of course, included within HACCP. Again, like I said, a cog in a larger machine. I don't want to say small cogs. We're not a small cog, are we? We're an important integral cog to a larger machine. Ask your customer about HACCP. Say to them, have you got the principles of HACCP implemented here? Because if you have, great. Let's have a chat about it. Let's talk about what I'm doing, what we need to do, make sure we're complying with what you need to comply with in terms of HACCP. You can also do some, food safety training yourself. Again, today is not a HACCP training or HACCP webinar session, so I'm not going to be spending too long on it. But even if you get a level 2 in food safety, that'll certainly be covered there. You can get level 3s, things like that. Again, because what does that give you? That doesn't just give you the knowledge of what you need to do, but it also gives your customer confidence that you've got your pest control qualifications, and I'm a food business, and you've also got some food qualifications. Great. It can only help you. HACCP's obviously for your customer to implement. It's not for you to implement. You don't need to go away and sort of think, oh, blimey, I've got to learn about HACCP now and how to implement these things. It's not for you to implement the procedures. It's for you to support your customer who needs to implement these procedures. So again, when it comes to pest control, let's talk about so in terms of HACCP, what it involves, it's looking closely at what your customer does in their business, what could go wrong, what risks there are to the food safety. So pest is one of these, isn't it? Of course it is. Whether it be the body itself or the related defecation or the physical touching of surfaces when the pest moves over it, things like that. That's a hazard, isn't it? So we want to, mitigate that hazard and that risk. And then you've got the, identifying any critical control points in the business to focus on to ensure those risks are removed and reduced to safe levels. So again, it's all, hazards and risks, it's simple stuff. Okay, there's a hazard here. We need to reduce that chance of that becoming a problem and getting into a food chain or causing contamination and possible real serious problems. And then, deciding what action your customer needs to take if something does go wrong. So again, if you get those instances where, right, we've done our best to prevent pests coming in, but they have. So, right, what can we do to, solve this thing that's gone wrong and quickly? This is what the expectation will be by any auditor or any EHO, is that action is taken. And also making sure that these procedures are being followed and are working. Your customer will probably want to discuss this with you. It might be on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, but they'll want to review what you're doing. So, your site folders and your paperwork is going to be really important. I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later on. And again, it is important to have food safety management procedures that are appropriate for the business. So that word appropriate, struggling to say that today. Appropriate. Yeah, anyway, you know what I'm saying. Really important because as with everything, each business is different. You might have a small local cafe, that deals with, a very small kitchen and, a few customers coming in and out, compared to possibly, a food distribution center or, a multi-store chain that has 300 seats for customers and 17 staff in the kitchen. You've got different levels, so their HACCP procedures will be different depending on the size of the business and what food they develop. Everything from fish or vegan and vegetarian and meat and vegetables will all be slightly different. They'll have their own processes, but important that you're aware of it. Okay, so food hygiene regulations and HACCP. They're important stuff for you to be aware of. Okay, so your customers, HACCP, in terms of it and what your customers will be doing. So there are three main types of food hazards. So you've got the microbiological, chemical, and physical. In terms of microbiological, obviously the bacterias and the diseases that, of course, pests can spread when they're moving over surfaces and contacting food and contacting the utensils, maybe in the kitchen, things like that. So microbiological. Said that okay, didn't I? Long word. And then chemical. So, of course, maybe not particularly related to the pest specifically, but the things that you'll be doing could involve chemicals. So again, it's about following that hierarchy of use. God, blimey. Making sure you're using non-chemical where you can. And then when you are using any chemicals, you're doing it in a way to prevent any contamination. So again, these are things in HACCP that are very important to them. And then physical, so involving objects in food. Again, pest management, rodent droppings, fly carcasses, rodent carcasses even, even the things you're doing. So if you're using, disposable gloves while you're inspecting, making sure, if you're taking them off and you put them in your pocket, it doesn't fall out and possibly contaminate a food line or, it can happen. These are things we got to think about what we're doing and we're not creating any problems within that business ourselves. We can be pests sometimes, can't we, us humans? And also, so again, I'm not here to train about food safety and HACCP, but things like metal detectable pens, something that, some of your customers, they may insist that's what you have. Their HACCP plan will say that you're a contractor coming into my business, you're doing work that we need, great, but these are the things you need to do to keep us safe. And metal detectable pens might be one of them, and you might have to wear hair nets and things like that, of course. I've even been into factories where you kind of have to walk through 2 or 3 different sanitization rooms. Is that the word? You know what I mean? You go into one and you take your shoes off and you put some overalls on or coveralls on, zip them up, leave your equipment there, and you go into another room and you wash your hands and put some fancy boots on that have been sanitized, and you put your hair net on, and then maybe in an extra room they might even spray you with something. They don't spray you with anything. I'm only kidding. But yeah, you have the decontamination rooms to make sure you don't get that. And I think that was in a sushi factory, actually. And of course, that's a really high risk. Think about it. You've got rice that's been cooked and then cooled very quickly, and it's very vulnerable to bacteria and to potential contamination. Because of how they make that, and the raw fish, of course, that they use, and the raw vegetables that they use, and putting all of that together. So anybody going into that area needs to be sanitized, really, to be quite descriptive of it. And pests are absolutely not welcome in those areas. So really, really critical. So talk to your customer, okay? Just a little bit something from the Food Standards Agency, the FSA. You might have heard of them before, usually abbreviated, the FSA. And again, this is just an extract that I've taken from one of their their guidance documents. Just a table. There's many more that comes from here, but I've just taken this screenshot of a few important ones. You see, they've identified the problems that pests can cause. So, the ones that carry harmful microorganisms, things like birds and rodents and insects, they all can carry food poisoning bacteria, Campylobacter and Salmonella. I mean, these bacterias are drilled into the psyche of any food business, that we do not want these bacteria here, and we need to identify all the possible routes of contamination and where it could come from, and we need to address that. And of course, pest management is a huge part of that. And then the possible outcomes. So, it increases the chance of contamination, as we know. Physical contamination of food as well, and health and safety hazards, be it for the staff or customers predominantly. But staff can also be vulnerable to these things. If they're not carrying out proper hygiene measures and washing hands and things like that, and they touch the face and they happen to have come into contact with one of these bacteria. So important for everybody. And in terms of the damage as well, so pests can cause physical damage, to products and packaging, fixtures and equipment, gnawing electrical cables. There's all sorts of things that it's not necessarily just related to that raw food product. It could be those that environment around that food product that can be attacked. And maybe we've got to make sure we do these inspections to look for damaging on packaging and equipment, stuff like that. And it also get your customer, you get them to report any problems, get them to do their duty of care and inspections every now and then of their stock rotation, making sure if they notice any damage or something unusual, or a speck of something that might look like a feces from an animal, talk to you about it, get in touch so that you can come and investigate and make sure it's not something that's going to cause them a serious contamination. Okay, so again, something from the Food Standards Agency, maybe another area for you to have a little research later on. Remember, if you do any research after today, it's all CPD as well. You can get your 1 CPD point for today. But if you spend a couple of hours looking at Food Standards Agency or food hygiene regulations and HACCP, you can get some CPD points for that. You need to register it yourself, but again, we can support you if you're on our scheme, and Basis Point to better support you if you're on their scheme. So remember that, okay? The stuff you do off of your own back, doing your own research, sat on your own, you can still get CPD for it. Okay, so the risks that your customers face then, the importance of being us, I've kind of labelled this, because we are important when it comes to food businesses. There's many problems that can occur. So I'm just going to go through a few of them. And of course, reputation is a massive one. Having pests in your business is never good for business, of course. And, with social media at our hands, someone sat in a restaurant, or going into a takeaway, waiting for their takeaway to be, handed over the counter, and they're standing there and they see some flies, or they might even see a little mouse having a little nibble in the corner. What do? They pick the phone up, take a picture of it, maybe even take a video of it if they've got time and they're left to their own accord. And where is that going to end up? Well, probably on their, social media pages. They might even fancy getting in touch with a local newspaper. You never know. It's really easy to do, really accessible. 20 years ago, you had to write a letter to your local newspaper and they'd probably ignore it anyway. Or, is it a little bit harder? I don't know if that's how you used to do it, but, whereas now, fingertips stuff. So really important for their reputation. And because word of mouth is a massive part of reputation, isn't it? A lot of you guys out there, guys and girls, you get referrals from just word of mouth, or you've done a wasp's nest at John Doe's house, and he's told his friend down the road, Jane Doe, this is you want to use Bob here, he's great at getting rid of wasp nests. And again, you get some more business and it builds and builds. And it's same for your customers, especially food businesses. If the word of mouth starts spreading an issue like pests, they won't get many customers anymore. So reputation, really, really important. I mean, I had it myself not too long ago. I was in a chain of bakeries, I mentioned the name, stood there waiting for my sausage roll, whatever it was I ordered, can't remember. And there were three house flies flying around the counter, and they landed on, I think it might have been a pizza or something like that, I don't know, but they were flying around and landing on it. I thought, oh, I'm glad I'm not ordering that. You know what? And I stood there and I thought, Natalie, what takes responsibility here? Let them know about it. Don't just stand there and think, I'm glad I'm not buying that. You need to tell them about it, because it's your duty of care, because someone else could come along, buy that pizza or whatever it was, and scoff it down, and before they know it, they're in bed the next couple of days, severely ill, and it can lead to more serious outcomes if Campylobacter, salmonella, things like that. It's pretty serious. So I have a responsibility, and I just politely took them to the side and said, oh, there's quite a few flies around that food. I recommend you don't sell it. And they were like, oh, okay, yeah, thanks for that. Made a bit of an excuse of, oh, yeah, no, we was aware. We were just going to take that away. I don't know if they were, but that's fine, saving face and everything. But, they took it away, got rid of it. And hopefully they took from that as well that, that EFK that's right up there, probably not working. Maybe the light bulb is just not emitting the UV light that it needs to attract those flies in, which, we look at it and think, oh, yeah, it's still shining. It's all right. There's not one up there. I'm just, imitating what I did on the day. And yeah, we might see that blue light, green light, whatever it is, but the flies necessarily won't if that bulb is out of date and has expired. So, hopefully they took it upon themselves to do that. So yeah, really important. Reputation is very important. I'll still be going to that shop, by the way, and buying my sausage roll because I like sausage rolls, but I'll be keeping an eye out. Okay, but you don't want somebody else maybe who would fancy getting their camera out, do you? So financial loss, reputation kind of leads into financial loss as well, doesn't it? Because if, one of your customers has a social media post or a newspaper article about how disgusting their business is because there's flies around the counter or a mouse in the corner, they're going to probably lose some money out of that, aren't they? Because no one's going to come in and buy their food anymore. So they're going to have financial loss through that reputation. But also, that legislation I was mentioning before, if an EHO comes in and says, right, you've got a pest problem here, it's of a level that I am not happy allowing your premises to stay open, so I'm going to close you. Okay, so closures, that's going to cost you money. Customer's not going to be coming in, not going to be earning any money. Prosecution and civil action. Prosecution normally results in a fine of some sort. Civil action, if somebody gets, so civil action is different to prosecution, because civil action is if I, the customer, eats that pizza that had the flies on it and gets really poorly, and then thinks to myself, hang on a minute, I think that my Campylobacter or whatever I've got has come from that business. I can report them, an investigation will be done, and then they could possibly be prosecuted because of that contamination. So I would be civilly suing them and saying, you've made me ill, I want some money, please. And the government bodies, the EHOs, would be prosecuting them criminally for allowing that product to be sold. So there could be all sorts of money going out in all sorts of directions, paying people for saying, sorry, I did that, don't want that. And of course, repairs. Normally if an EHO comes in and says that thing needs fixing, you need to fix it. And that will cost you money, of course. If you do these things as you go along and you notice it early stages and, that tile's coming off, let's sort it out, can cost you less money than waiting till, 50 of them are starting to fall off. I don't know why that's just an example, but you see what I'm getting at. So repairs will be an issue. And of course, loss of custom and insurance. So insurance premiums is really key here, because if a business has to claim on their insurance because of loss of revenue or repairs they've got to make because, they've just ignored it for so long and that it's become a massive issue now, or they might even claim on pest-related issues because some insurance does have pest management in the offering, then again, their premiums will go up. Possibly even they get a bad reputation and that insurance company will say, okay, well, you've been prosecuted, so we're going to put your premiums up even though you haven't claimed. It can happen, insurance companies, they'll put it up when they can. So all these things, there's a lot of financial loss there, a lot of financial loss. And a moral obligation. We can't forget the moral obligation, because do you know what? Why would you want to make your customers poorly? Okay, you don't want to lose money, you don't want your reputation to be damaged, but you don't want them to be poorly. You don't want to wish illness on, a fellow human. So, causing illness or, even death sometimes, you don't want to morally, you don't want to cause that. Just being a decent human being, you don't want to cause illness to anybody. Okay, quite a straightforward one there. So again, in terms of the importance of being us, we've got the legislation, regulations, we've got HACCP that kind of comes within that. And we've also got standards and accreditations. Now, some of you will, well, maybe a lot of you will be very familiar with you. There's 139 of you with me today. So, I don't know how many of you exactly are familiar with things like the British Retail Consortium, SALSA, and other bespoke standards. So, usually the larger supermarkets will have their own bespoke standards that they go, this is what we want. We want it to be this controlled. We want you to do this many visits. We want you to, sleep on site if, you get a mouse. I'm exaggerating a bit, but, really, really detailed and very, very bespoke. Whereas the BRC and SALSA are very more generic. So anybody can kind of, sign up to those. Now, again, I'm not here to teach you about standards or anything, but, they give the end user standards. If a company has got a standard, it gives the end user confidence in the product they are buying. For example, you go to M&S and you're like, buy a sandwich in a pretty packet, it's M&S greatest, finest. I don't know what their terms are, but you're expecting a lovely sandwich. You expect a lovely sandwich. So if it's got contamination in it, or you got poorly from it, or there was that's not meant to be in my sandwich, a bit of plastic or mouse poo or fly or something like that, you are not going to be happy. And that is a massive impact on the reputation of these large organizations. So they have really, really tight controls in place to make sure, or tight standards in place that they make their customers, that they make their contractors implement, so that they can be confident that that product is going to be safe. So, for example, if you were M&S and I'm Natalie, the pest controller, looking after one of your sites, then that site will be working to the M&S standard. And that M&S standard, or Waitrose standard, or Tesco standard will say, right, Natalie, if you find a mouse, you've got to come back every 2 days and make sure that you're checking any trapping or baiting that you're doing, and you can't just I'll come back in a week, I'll come back in a couple of weeks, it'll be all right. Absolutely no. They need to make sure that all of the contractors that are looking after all of their products and all of their production lines and keeping everybody safe, that they're doing it to a really high standard, so that that sandwich you buy in the shop is not going to have contamination. It's not going to have any issues. They need to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's why they're really strict. Understandable, isn't it? If you owned a company that was large as some of these, you would possibly feel the same. So, and then said BRC and SALSA, they said they're similar, maybe not as strict in some people's eyes, but they give, they have expectations in terms of how pest management is done, and qualifications. It would say, you need to be qualified, or you might need to be a member of an association as a pest control organization. You'll, need to do maybe a biologist visit once a year. It depends on the site, doesn't it? But, all these things would be in these standards. If you want to know a bit more about that, we have lots of information on our website. So yeah, if you see these, if you start getting work coming in, they're like, they've told me they're BRC. I don't know what that means. This is what it means. It's an accreditation they work to. A bit like being a BPCA member. For any of you watching today that are a member of the BPCA, we have strict criteria. You've got to be qualified, you've got to have CPD, you've got to have insurance, you've got to be assessed and audited, and you have to meet those standards. And if you don't meet those standards, then you're not compliant with our criteria. So it's similar with these standards here. If I had my own food production line or cafe, and I thought, right, I want to sell to those people, I've got to be on BRC, I need to meet BRC standards, otherwise they will not allow me to work to it. Okay. Blimey. I'm going to need to get a move on here. So that's really important bits there. But as I said, it's not a biology or behavior lesson today, but we'll just go into in terms of pests themselves. As I said, I can't talk about all of these, and I probably can't even talk about 2 of them, which I'm going to, but we'll see how we get along. As I said, I don't mind if we run over by 5 or 10 minutes. Now, this is not a a full list of all the pests you can get, of course not. And in terms of what I'm going to go forward and talk about, flies and mice, because they're probably one of the most common pests that we would get within a, if you're in a cafe or a restaurant or maybe even a food factory. The flies and mice can be the main suspects. So always remember integrated pest management, IPM, that is across the board, whether you're talking about food businesses or farms or, residential properties. Integrated pest management, really, really key, especially in food businesses. So in terms of mice then, so the house mouse, Musculus musculus, your customers will normally say, how did they get here? Now, you're not necessarily ever going to know unless you saw that mouse be brought in. But that is a common way. I was just speaking to someone the other day that a large food production site, packaging site, they know that house mouse can be brought in on deliveries sometimes. So that's why they then get an occurrence of a bit of mouse activity here and then. So these things are important because thinking, right, they can be brought in on deliveries. Okay, my advice to my customer is make sure you have a routine inspection in place for incoming deliveries. So goods in, make sure, you look around the packaging, see if there's any damage, open it up, make sure you can't see any droppings or flies or pupae or anything in there. When it comes out on the trolley, make sure the trolley hasn't got anything kind of, stuck to it or sitting in the corner waiting to hop into your factory or cafe. So, these are really important things. It could be a residual issue that's just sort of there in the building, maybe neighbouring properties are spilling over their infestation. It can get tricky when you've got a whole big long row of restaurants. We've all been there, possibly. Certainly the ones on the call here today, webinar today, will possibly hear because you do have them. But, we've seen them on main high streets where there's, 12 different takeaway places. And when you get, a mouse infestation, a house mouse infestation in one of these properties, it can spread throughout. So, really important. And they, because they can be throughout the voids and cavities. Prizes awarded to anyone who can think of another route that mice may enter the building. Bit of fun. But yeah, they're the main ones I could think of. Now, in terms of field mouse, Apodinus sylvaticus, they come in from outside, of course, as we know, normally during the colder times of the year. Not exclusive, of course. You can get them in through warmer weathers if, they so want to, but usually around cooler times because they're going to live out in the fields rather than house mouse. I mean, the name says it all, doesn't it? They're house mice. They don't live outside generally. They might move from building to building, or you might see them scurry around the outside of a building, back in another door or something like that. But if you've got a house mouse infestation, you can't assume that, it's quite established in the building, we need to proof these holes from the outside to stop them getting in. That's not really an issue with house mice because they're there probably from another source, because again, they don't live out in the fields like field mice do. And they usually start on the sublevels, so ground levels. That's a key indicator, and they can move throughout the building, but usually on the lower levels. But really key behaviour, and again, this is not a biology lesson, but understanding how and why pests may get into buildings is important. And this key behaviour here. So if you have monitoring stations that have got food in there, be it on a disused trap or a set trap or non-toxic block, you might have even brought some toxic bait in if you feel that it's necessary. A key behavior is that field mice will cover that food with bits of whatever's around, bits of paper, bits of stone. I've seen, I've opened boxes and it's just been a big pile of stones on top of the food that was in there, because that's a behavior of a field mouse. They will protect that food. House mice will not. So if you see that in a bait box, it's house mice. Okay, really easy identifiable bit. Now this is key. So remember, there are no rodenticides authorised for use on field mice. If you think, I've got a field mouse problem here, do not switch to rodenticide. You cannot legally use rodenticide against field mice. You have to use physical means. Okay, so at any point you feel it is field mice, do not use rodenticides. Mice, again, I've mentioned a lot of these as we've gone through. So, mice are a problem for obvious reasons, droppings and urine. Don't want that on surfaces, don't want it getting into food. Hair, as they run along, hair will detach. They might run through, holes and, slightly not too small for them, but slightly small for the body. They squeeze through and some hair comes off, or, sticky, greasy areas, you might get hairs coming off. And of course, they can contaminate food and food production areas. The movement of them, so they've got dirty paws, they're running in dirty areas and then putting it on clean areas. They're transferring that bacteria from one dirty area to a clean area. And of course, disease transmission and the carcasses. There's a famous and a lot of training, but whether we do and other people do, there's a famous image from years and years ago, maybe 30 years ago, of a mouse baked into a loaf of bread. And of course, it's an extreme, isn't it? But yeah, you don't want to be cutting through your bread, do you, that you bought from the local supermarket and find a carcass of any description in there at all. So yeah, that's important. Okay, so flies, we've got one here. Alex Wade kindly sent this in to us from Wade Environmental. As you can see, pretty nasty, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what that is in the blender, I think it is. God, it looks like maybe a mushed up fruit of some description, but you've got an arrow there, haven't you, pointing to the eggs that will be laying. Now, this is a blowfly, so you get green flies, blue bottles, but they're blowing their eggs onto the food. I mean, that is a nice close-up. You must have a good camera. I'm pretty impressed with that. But, I mean, yeah, you don't want that going into someone's stomach, do you? I mean, it's all a bit gippy, isn't it? At the best of times. But not only that, it's, EHOs are not going to be happy. So yeah, in terms of waste, not disposing of waste safely outside businesses can be a real issue. So that's going to attract possibly rats and mice. Again, I haven't covered rats in here specifically, but of course, I was talking earlier about having a good waste disposal and, good waste areas. You chuck bin bags on the floor, it's like, dinner time, isn't it? It's going to attract them. And then those rats will rip those bags open and then flies will go, oh, I've suddenly had a nice smell, and you'll have the flies descending and maybe foxes and birds and all sorts. So really important that waste is dealt with properly. So with flies, got the common house fly and fruit flies. Again, just the more common things that you get really, with house flies. They usually breed on rotting vegetable matter and animal feces. So it's important to know what they breed on so that you can advise your customers to keep those things, more specifically swept up, cleaned up, wiped up in bags, protected away, because they've got a real acute sense of smell and they can detect these things from miles away. I give my dog bones sometimes in the garden. So when they start eating it, it's just a, bombardment of green flies, blue bottles, house flies. It's just, not so much house flies, but green bottles and blue bottles. They're quite, so in terms of common house flies, they're quite common around chicken sheds. So, if you've got food businesses or factories that have maybe got a farm down the road or nearby, and you're like, actually, they have a lot of chickens in there, and you're experiencing an increase in fly problems. And it could be that you need to actually try and communicate with that site and find out what they're doing to try and reduce their flies, and that will in turn help your customer. So talking to neighbours and looking at what other businesses are doing, and making sure that waste management also is controlled. With common housefly, another issue with regards to food is that, we all know about their regurgitation and how they contaminate and how disgusting their feeding habit is, in that they project saliva onto the matter they're feeding from. They stamp in the saliva, kind of mush it all up, and then they suck it back up again. And this is minute, we don't necessarily see this happening necessarily, and then you don't see that, or you do see it and just swat it away and think, oh, I'll eat that thing anyway. It's not going to be pleasant. With fruit flies breeding on rotting vegetable matter, fruit and milk, things like that, there is a potential disease transmission. Again, it depends on where they've been, what they've landed on, and what they're spreading around. Real nuisance in large numbers, and housekeeping is vital with both of these as well. In terms of dealing with them, a lot of the time you don't necessarily need chemical. A lot of it is hygiene and recommendations and sealing and stopping and disposing of and sweeping and mopping and so on and so forth. It's, a lot of that is involved. So I'm popping through these quite quickly because I honestly don't know how time goes this quickly. Hopefully you can all stay with me. So yeah, flies in food businesses, again, just a little bit more about contamination wise and what they do. Of course, droppings, they'll leave those, characteristic black smear marks behind. Body and body parts, it might be wings or legs or the whole thing. Especially things like EFKs, you don't want to be positioning them above a food preparation surface where it's got especially a kill grid, so an electrical grid that then almost explodes the fly, doesn't it? And then it can, waft out onto different food surfaces and into foods. You don't want that. So yeah, disease transmission, the same things. Again, I've mentioned about the feeding habit. And of course, larvae and pupae as well. So, the larvae that the eggs that are being laid, the resulting larvae that are hatching out, that's contaminating everything. And I mean, it's probably one of the most disgusting things that people, members of the public would see and go, oh, there's maggots everywhere, really disgusting to them. So, really, really important. And also when them larvae are ready to pupate, they'll move away from the food and find a dark crevice, like we all do when we want to go to bed and chill out. Dark crevice and ready to pupate. So that habit in itself, by if you've got a bin area close to a building, I've had this before in a butcher's where they had a big bin. It was blowflies, not house flies, but it's a big bin with lots of meat, dirty meat products. I had it bagged up, but it wasn't bagged up very well and ripped. And there was all these larvae everywhere. But also the larvae were crawling up the walls. And they were doing that because they were trying to get away from that food source, because they were like, right, I'm full up now. I'm done with what I'm eating. I'm going to go and chill out, pupate, grow into a fly and, do one and start the whole process again. So that movement can cause contamination as well. So there's a few flies sent in from John Richards, one of our members, Krypton Environmental. It's kind of spot the fly really, but you can see here, hopefully you can see my arrows. Can I get a little remote control? Am I going to do something I shouldn't? Yeah, no, don't do that because I'll probably press something and you'll disappear or something. But yeah, you can see the flies have landed here, look. And on these napkins, okay, it's got a sealed plastic packaging, but still, you don't know if you got one that's open here. So these flies landed on this sealed packaged napkins might be popping over to here, and then you're handing them out to customers, they're joyously wiping their mouths with the napkin, to clean up the food that they've been eating. I always need a napkin. I'm messy when I'm eating. So you can't have that there. And again, sitting on the side of this fridge here, there's, in the picture I can't quite see, but there are a few little specks of droppings that they've left behind as well. So not good. And the environmental health officer is not going to enjoy that. And your customers aren't going to enjoy being ill either. Why is this not moving along? There we go. Pest management in terms of what you do. So prevention, as is everything in pest management, prevention is key. Do your surveys, do your recommendations. It's up to you to show your customer what good work you do, and having a system in place will help that. So it doesn't need to be complicated and, pages and pages and pages of stuff, but simple survey, maybe once a year, twice a year at the beginning of a contract. Right, these are things I've noticed. A standalone survey document with recommendations set aside, as these are the recommendations you need to do, and I'm going to do some proactive stuff here, but I've also got some reactive bits. Give a really good picture of it. It can be short, it can be brief, but just if it's there, it looks really, really great, and it helps you to prove that you're covering them in every way that they need. A quick reaction to problems, site folders, and educating your customer. I said at the beginning, didn't I, about educating your customer. You are educated, you know what you're talking about, but make sure the same thing happens with them, that you educate them about why they need to do these things, why they need to seal that hole, stop doing that thing. With knowledge comes power. Flies in general, again, I'm not here to tell you how to control flies. We haven't got time for that. But, for monitoring and mopping up those flies that do come, and electrical fly killers are great. Make sure they're suitable. They cover the range that they need to, as well as they're at the height and level that they should be at, in terms of where the flies are actually, moving and they're going to see it. Don't put it opposite windows. You don't want to start attracting flies in, things like that. Proofing the fly screens that I mentioned at the beginning, making good judgments. So, having a look around, thinking, okay, well, there's not a problem with flies at the minute, but I've just seen, a new business startup next door and it's a butcher's or, there's a farm up the road that's got a big chicken pen now. And, all these things you pick up on, and you think, oh, I'll just mention that to my customer. Maybe we go and, have a little chat to them, or, you might not, but think outside the box. And again, in most situations, chemical use is maybe not needed for flies. Integrated pest management, implement good recommendations and hygiene. Similar with mice. Think if you get especially house mouse, things like that into a property, you probably will need to use some killing methods, be it, traps or rodenticide, up to you to decide that. But finding the root cause is important, finding out why they're there if you can. Because if they are field mice, then, you can do the proofing that you need to do. And if they're house mice and you think it's just been a recent problem and you've got some neighbours, maybe go and have a chat to them, find out maybe why the mice are there or why the rats are there, of course, as well. It's quite important. Clear on the recommendations and collaboration with neighbours is really important, like I've mentioned, also an IPM. In terms of field mouse, like I mentioned, no rodenticides, you can't use them. But external walls and proofing is important. It's very useful. And also, it's important for you to identify the species. Like I said, you can do that if you see any of that hoarding, that covering of the food source, and that's a good indication, as well as, the mouse itself and the droppings. A bit harder to identify the species, but they can. But usually more of a problem in winter. Now, I mentioned about recommendations and templates. It's just an example of something some of our members at some point will start to be able to download. It's not live yet or anything. We're working on them. But, having a site folder with an overview of recommendations. So, you're putting in this box here that, okay, there's a spillage behind counter 2. Really important you clean this up. And, what report number was it that you specifically talked about this, and how important? Say to them, look, this is high importance. You need to get this done as soon as, please. And it might be that you say, okay, well, this is the responsibility of the hygiene manager or the domestic staff, or it might even be your responsibility if you're recommending that, I don't know, a grate on the outside is put over, a grill over a hole, or you sealing something that your customers said, yeah, actually go and do it for me, I'll pay you for it, can you do it? And again, you put it in there that you'll do it and date completed. And then you've got a good record. EHOs love these things. They can see stuff is happening. All right. And biology visits, I mentioned again, food hygiene training, really, really useful for you. We also have this certificate of pest compliance, so members can download this. It's something that, so this was a cafe one of our members was servicing, and they downloaded the certificate, and this certificate basically says, my cafe is compliant with keeping my site free of pests proactively. It's almost like I'm being proactive, and I've got a good pest contractor in. You can have it up on your wall, and people aren't going to see pest management as a negative then. It takes away that negative connotation of you must have a pest problem. No, actually, this is routine stuff. This is proactive. It's good. I'm being responsible as a food business owner. So you can download that certificate. There we go. Okay, blimey, that was a lot. I'm really sorry if you felt I went through that last bit a little bit. I got through at the beginning, though, the really important areas, the regulations around it, the reasons why you need to do this stuff. It's important things for you to know about. And again, like the pest specifically, that we do have webinars on those that you can go and view. Okay, we've got 7 questions here. I'm going to say, I'm going to run 10 minutes over. Everybody's okay with that? We've got 13 minutes and I'll be running 10 minutes over. If anyone's got a problem with that, well, don't, just stay with us. 13 minutes. Hey, what are you going to lose in 13 minutes? Right. Okay. 7 questions. We'll be all right. So, hello. Some of you had some problems at the beginning, so hopefully Kat sorted that out for you, but hopefully that got sorted out. Blank screen, no visual. Okay. Well, hopefully that got sorted out. Okay, here. So what should we do if we have already given our customers recommendations based on food hygiene regulations for example, air curtain installation, etc. But they replied that they can't afford it and said that they've already paid us to get rid of the pests no matter what. Yes, this is very common, isn't it? Because we have magic wands. Hang on, where's my magic wand? Whoop. Yeah, so great question, Fipan. So the food hygiene regulations is not your responsibility. Though that company that has that food business, they are the ones that are responsible for complying with food hygiene regulations. Full stop. Okay. So if you give a recommendation to say you need to install something to prevent these flies and they don't take that advice, that's on them. Okay. That's on them. Now, in terms of them not being able to afford it, you might better have discussions and figure out if there's something that's more affordable. This is very site specific, so I can only be really generic with you. So apologies on that. But if the minimum amount of money that needs to be spent on something to stop it from breaking food regulations, then they need to do it. If they can't do it, they shouldn't own a food business. They've got there's going to what's the word? Ignorance is not an excuse in terms of the law, and EHOs won't take into account, your profits weren't quite high enough, so that fly or that mouse got in and contaminated that product. Don't worry, they're not going to do that. And they need to understand that. And like I said at the beginning, the more knowledge you have on the legislation and what their responsibilities are, you can educate them on it, and you can support them. Obviously, we don't want to do these things sarcastically with them, or with contempt, or oh, you're a bit stupid, aren't you? You should know these things. But support them. Be like, look, I've done some training on regulations. I know what it is that you need to do, and I'm worried about an EHO coming in and seeing these things, and it will ultimately be yourself that's going to be in trouble for these things. So in terms of but we don't have a magic wand. And also cost regulations are there to prevent the overuse of chemicals. So, just going in and saying, okay, you can't afford to do that thing that will stop the problem completely. So I'll just, spray some cheap pesticide around every now and then. I mean, that's not along with legislation either. And legally, probably label requirements is not the best way to go. So hopefully that's answered it a little bit. Apologies if I babbled a bit there, but by all means, get in touch again, and on the phone or email, and we'll try I'll try and help you more. If you've got a more site-specific example, I'm happy to do that. So Gary, I wonder what your views may be on digital remote pest monitoring as more systems become available, particularly around compliance, sustainability, and importantly, early detection of rodent presence and risk mitigation. So yes, so digital remote pest monitoring, I mean, yeah, if it works, doesn't it? It's all this, you're taking away that human being there and knows something. So digital and remote monitoring, it can work in some capacities, absolutely. It can assist, it can be part of an integrated pest management program, because it can reduce the amount of visits, but more importantly, maybe, reduce that time of noticing a problem. So, if something's digital, and I don't know, it's a trap that has a sensor on it that texts you when it goes off or something like that, it's quite instant, isn't it? Oh, a rodent's gone in there. Oh, a rodent's gone in there. 10 minutes later, you're there dealing with it. Whereas without that, you might be days or weeks, maybe even months before you actually get to that. So it can help with that, but it's part of a service, is my opinion, and I think BPCA as a whole's opinion is, we're still needed there as humans, because we're not just a device that's monitoring what's going into it. We're looking around, like I've mentioned about thinking outside the box, right? As neighbours, right? There's a new business that started there. They could start causing problems because there are butchers, or it's a chicken farm a bit further down the road, and it's quite common you might get flies with those things, blue bottles and house flies. So yeah, are we secure here? You look around the cafe, right? Yeah, we've got the fly screens in. Okay, we're being proactive in that way. If you start to see an increase in flies, you can then look outside and go and speak to those customers possibly. So yeah, that human element I think is always needed there, because we can think outside that digital remote box. Like how I did that. So that's it. part of an integrated approach, I think, is the best way to see it, rather than a replacement of any pest professional. Can you please share your presentation? I don't know, that's a question for Kat, really, actually. I don't. So the presentation we won't necessarily be able to share, as in my slides and things. I'm quite precious.
We don't share the presentation slides, but we will put it on the website and on our YouTube channel afterwards. Great,
thanks, Kat. That's yeah. So we won't share the slides with you. You can take away and do yourself, but we'll certainly be this webinar will be up and can share it, as Kat said. Okay, in that way. I've missed the workshop on the 7th of July. Can you repeat that workshop in future? So Sunny, just get in touch with the best ones. Actually, probably just hello@bpca.org.uk. Ask that question and they can let you know where that is, because you might need to give us some more details just on what workshop it is specifically you wanted to see. So apologies, I don't know that exactly right now, but how long? Well, I've got another 6 minutes. It's okay. So Stuart, will the potential removal of glue boards cause more issues for eliminating vermin in high-risk food businesses? Well, Stuart, you had to ask me that question, didn't you? It's site. I mean, it's everything. It's site specific. I mean, there are a lot of people that glue boards don't mean anything to them. They've never used them, never will use them. The food businesses they've had, they haven't needed them in. They've used traps or rodenticides, or all of the above or none of the above. Whereas there will be pest controllers that work in environments where they have relied on glue boards for whatever reason. I don't know what those reasons are. So yeah, it could possibly make it harder for them to eliminate mice or rats in high risk food businesses. But it is what it is. If they do go, we don't, still in discussions with that. But if they do go, then we'll help everyone get over it. It's fine. Don't worry. There'll be, I know we talk about traps. Traps can do a similar thing, snap traps. There might be other training that we should implement, or the industry should implement, to get people to use them in a more efficient way. Not saying people don't, but maybe there's a way we can use them better so that they can mimic glue boards in a way. There'd be a way. So it could have short-term issues for some people, but the banning of any glue boards is a process, and it can take a fair couple of years for it to actually happen. So in that time, we'll all be okay. It'll be sorted. So opinion, it's very light-hearted there, but could do. Hopefully won't, because we'll support. Okay, so Emma, so what can we use to control mice in production mice in production floor areas without using bait stations or bait? Again, site specific. I mean, why can't you have bait stations there? I'm assuming because of standards and accreditations, possibly. Sometimes if you do get issues in areas where a standard or accreditation says you're not allowed to do that thing, you can actually ask permission to do that thing if it's needed. I know certain things like the Soil Association, you can't use certain chemicals, or it's got to be natural derivatives. But if there's a certain problem comes up, or a pest problem where you need to work outside of that standard, you can ask permission to use different things, and they'll approve or not approve, or give you some guidance on it. So you can always ask that. I mean, you've got, say, live capture. We do. I mean, live capture is not something we overthink about, but I suppose, if that's an option, or if they're mice in a production area, house mice, maybe you can target them in other areas. So if they're, because normally the mice won't be living on that production floor, they'll be running from one area to another and over. So, okay, where are they? Where's that source coming from? Are they in the cavities? Are they in the roof? Are they coming from outside, or are they house mice and there's a neighbor next door and it's causing? Look at why they're running across that surface and go to source. If you can't do anything in that immediate area, that would be my best advice. So Alexander, am I not responsible if my pest controller tells me to fix some building damage? if he says, for example, that mice and rats are coming in there, main question, at which point am I exactly responsible for pests in my company? So, Alexander, you are responsible 100% of the time. Simple as that. So if I'm assuming you're a food business. So if I had, Natalie's sandwiches shop, sounds like a good business. And I had Kat was my pest controller who was coming in and doing my pest control. And then I had an EHO coming in and auditing me or assessing me. He or she doesn't necessarily give too much of a monkeys about what, Kat, the pest controller, is doing. They'll look at what she's doing, but ultimately it's up to you or up to me as Natalie's sandwiches shop to make sure I've got the right contractor, I've got the right stuff going on. Any recommendations that have been given to me by my pest controller, I am implementing, be it me asking my pest controller to do it, or be it me getting an external different contractor in to do it, or be it me getting on my hands and knees and doing it myself. It's up to me as the cafe owner to implement that food hygiene regulations. Nothing to do with the pest controller. Hopefully that's been quite a straightforward answer. I've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to have to pick one question and the rest I will pop on an email. We've got 11 left, so we haven't got a massive amount. So apologies for those that I don't get to. Actually, recording webinar. Yes, we're recording it. You'll be able to get access to it later on. We'll share that. Lost picture again. Okay, so not all questions. Hi, got some good info about pests in food businesses. Can you send me a certificate for attendance? Okay, attendance, that will, if you get in touch with the training department, they'll let you know if that's something we can give you. I think it's on request. So yeah, get in touch with the training department. So anonymous here, I own my own food safety training business. So nice to have an in-depth understanding from BPCA and the controls and standards you use. Do you have a database to where I can share my details with your members so I can support them and their customers with food safety regulations? Get in touch with me. Go pop onto our website. Get in touch. Pop me an email. It's on there under the staff details, and tell me more. Give me a ring. Have a chat, and we'll see what we can do. Okay. I think actually that might be all the questions. We've just got some lost picture again. Sorry about that if that was our end. But I wasn't aware. Can we get a recording? So there is one more question. Do you know what? There is actually only one more question. So I'm going to do it. Please, how do we control gestation period of roaches? Is there an eco-friendly chemicals to control their reproductive system? We have insect growth regulators, which is a physical means of control rather than chemical. They're usually not standalone products anymore. They're normally integrated into active ingredients like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head now. Usually in spray formulation, sometimes in bait formulation. But yeah, these are usually integrated. So insect growth regulators are there. But if you're not in the UK, then it may be different where you are, because I know we get some international listeners on here. So just have a look. Speak to your supplier. Your suppliers are the best ones to have a chat to and say, what stuff do you have? What products do you have? Have you got anything that's non-chemical or organic in nature or eco-friendly? Have a chat to them about that. Okay, that's me done. Wow, I got through all of them. Okay, I was 2 minutes over what I said. Lovely to have you all here. Thank you for sticking with me and hopefully answered a lot of questions there. And yeah, I'm going to go and have some lunch. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.